All right, another episode of the Square Compass podcast. This time with two brethren from Kentucky, often confused with California. We have got brother Tom Nitschke and brother Dan Kemble. Thank you so much both for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
So I got in touch with, it was with worship with brother Tom, and then he got in touch with brother Dan. Regarding, in particular, your involvement with your research lodge. So tell me a bit about that, but also tell me about your Masonic journey, and also what's happening with Freemasonry in Kentucky right now. Are you guys able to meet again? Are you guys doing degrees, things like that?
Well, I guess I'll start it off. In Kentucky, we are meeting again. All the lodges are able to participate in their meetings, so we're pretty much back to normal. Still have to follow some of the guidelines by the state, but for the most part, we're pretty much open. Regards to Freemasonry, my journey, it's been a little over going on 11 years, and didn't have a real connection with Freemasonry. I just knew it was something that intrigued me. I had a lot of history, a lot of things that I felt I could use in my life, and I reached out, and my journey started from that point forward. Uh, but like every other journey, I learned so many things along the road of what the Freemasonry I wanted. And I think that was the biggest thing for me is it's taken me about 11 years to really truly understand what I want out of Freemasonry and what it has to offer, and a lot of things that we forget that we actually do have. So my inclusion into the Lodge of Research was I believe, about 5 years ago. I was just looking for something more in depth in Freemasonry, and the Ware Lodge of Research was local, and I knew a lot of the brothers that were involved with it, and it looked really interesting, and I got involved with it, and here I am as the master. So it's kind of my story.
Brother Kemble?
I'll tell you a little bit about lodges of research, particularly in Kentucky. We are a creature of the Constitution of the Grand Lodge of Kentucky, which may give you some indication of how we're thought of by institutional Freemasonry. If you find our Constitution and go to the very end of it, the last thing that's mentioned in the Constitution are the provisions that create lodges of research. We do not do degree work. Now you asked earlier if degree work is going on in Kentucky, and it is, but lodges of research do not do degree work. We meet only on a quarterly basis, and our function is to perform Masonic research and to provide a forum for those who wish to provide Masonic research. And that's how we see our mission at William O. Ware Lodge of Research, to be a place where those who are interested in masonry beyond the surface can come to look at writings and materials that already exist, and also to create new writings and new materials as well. So that's how we see, I think, our mission as a lodge of research, and that's what we're carved out to do. Kentucky right now has 3 lodges of research, and I understand that there's potentially a 4th that's forming as well. So there is interest in Masonic education right now.
To what extent, you touched on something interesting there, the idea of going deeper into Freemasonry. My question is, and this is something I've been struggling with or trying to engage with in the podcast, is to what extent can a research lodge go outside of Freemasonry in order to find topics of Masonic interest or Masonic relevance? So, on the podcast, I've had, for example, Professor William Moore, who wrote a book basically chronicling Masonic buildings and Masonic temples in New York from 1870 to 1930. He did this exhaustive kind of study. I've had other individuals on who are themselves are not Masons, but are, have knowledge of topics that would be of Masonic interest: architecture, geometry, science and technology. It's, as a research lodge, do you find yourselves, how often do you find yourselves looking at maybe expertise from outside the craft and then bringing that into the craft and into Masonic education?
I think for our lodge, our research lodge, uh, we're developing, trying to work with uh, other uh, members, brothers from a wide array of disciplines, whether it be history, knowledge of ritual, and also reaching out to places, bringing people in from California, bringing people in from DC, to have different views that we may not perhaps have in Kentucky, that kind of enlighten our membership. And because every place, you're in Canada, is that correct?
Windsor, Ontario. Yeah.
Windsor, Ontario. So there are things that are unique to you, and gives a perspective about masonry and journeys, and how you live your Freemasonry. And if we can tap into some of those things that are outside our jurisdiction, it gives us an ability to expand our horizons, because sometimes you get kind of into a box and you just think of Kentucky Freemasonry. Just during this pandemic, we've just had so many different times that we're going across the country to get ideas and share, and all these Zoom meetings. And I'm just learning so many different things that I never thought of. And it just opened my eyes on several things. And uh, I think it's an opportunity that, for us to reach out to those brothers in different places to get a wide perspective. Brother Dan probably can expand on that as well.
Well, I think Freemasonry is a call to learning, and there are no limitations on that. We spend a lot of time learning about Freemasonry, and one of our limitations is we only meet 4 times a year, so we kind of have to be judicious about the things that we talk about. But in general, when we encourage Blue Lodges to have educational programs, I think it's wonderful to go outside of Masonry and look at topics that are important to us as individuals in a society. If you look at the history of Masonic lodges when they were organized in 1717 in the Grand Lodge of England, those are men who talked about the current events of the day. And a Masonic lodge was a place that they could safely do that. And I'd love to see that kind of environment exist in our lodges again. We're all about learning. And if what you're interested in is outside of Freemasonry, we encourage that. And I suspect that in any discipline, in any area that you look at, if you look at it closely enough, you'll bring it back to the craft at some place.
Yeah, I agree completely, and that's something that I've always been struck by, is the way Freemasonry can encompass so much, so many different areas of one's life, and knowledge and learning can be unfolded into Freemasonry, and the opportunities for Masonic education that brings. It doesn't always have to be necessarily, not that I'm certainly always happy to, for example, learn about, which is an important part of Masonic education. Learning about, architectural styles and why Masonic temples are designed, primarily neoclassical, oftentimes. I think things like that, that's something that I think there's a lot of room for in Masonic education and in growing lodges.
Yeah, and what you kind of expand on what you just said is just expanding ourselves. What I'm doing tonight, probably a couple of years ago, I'd be way nervous doing, and still am to some extent. But challenging myself to write papers, challenging myself to go in to lodges and speak publicly and clearly, and you're working on your grammar, your rhetoric, your all the things that can make you a successful person outside in your job. And I think we miss some of that too, is, we have a training ground to a safe environment among our peers, our brothers, and do those things that we're learning, we're improving, and we're becoming better. And I never thought I'd be doing some of the things I do now. And I see that it's helped me in my job, understanding, tolerance, uh, just trying to, uh, the fairness, and all those little things that we teach in our ritual, and applying those. And I think that in itself is we don't state that enough sometimes in masonry, of all the things that you're able to do. And that's the little things. It's that continual building of ourselves. So, and helping society afterwards.
Yeah, and that goes to something, I've referenced this a few times. I won't use the exact language, but basically, in our ritual in the third degree, and I believe it's the same in the States, there's basically a line about the basic premise is, as you grow in knowledge, you grow in social utility. The more knowledgeable you are on any number of topics, but especially, the liberal arts and sciences, which are very broad encompassing, the better member of society you can be in general, and the more useful you will be. Whether, and that goes back to ancient times, the sign above the I think it was Plato's University Academy, right? That no one who you need to understand geometry to enter here. The idea of an understanding of these things as being important to understand the world and be useful as a citizen. I think that's something that Masonry really emphasizes, and certainly your work in a lodge of research helps to further that as well.
Yeah, with that expanding, we're providing lodges to the lodges, regular standard lodges, or blue lodges, as we call them here in Kentucky, that we become a resource and give some guidance on the work we're doing in the research, the passion that we have for that research, and digging deeper. We in turn take that and become, like I said, a resource for lodges. They can in turn bring it to their lodge and expand to the minds of their brothers. And I think it's just a unique and powerful situation where we can help other lodges inform their brothers and have a quality, unique experience.
Would you say, this is for both of you guys, with your time in the research lodge and time in Freemasonry, are there areas of research that either you're particularly interested in, or that you maybe consider to be lacking, and are hoping to gather more research and information on those areas? Or I guess, what are some of the areas of research that have particularly interested you in your Masonic journey?
Dan, I'll let you go first because you're very well versed.
Well, I started professional life as a history teacher, so I'm very interested in history, and it is virtually impossible to separate American history from Masonic history. It's virtually impossible to separate Kentucky history from Masonic history. So the overlap is incredible, and I have enjoyed exploring that. As a fellow craft mason, we are all charged to study the liberal arts and sciences, and I will tell you that when I was a student in college, I struggled mightily with astronomy, and still know very little about it. That's an area where I would like to improve my knowledge. I'm not the greatest mathematician in the world. That's a place where I could use some improvement as well. And if we simply take the liberal arts and sciences that we're given as fellow craft masons and pursue those paths, there's no end to that. I mean, learning is forever, and that's the great appeal about Freemasonry.
I guess for myself, I'm sort of like Brother Dan is. I love the history. I'm just a history buff, and you'll probably find me somewhere on vacation, some historical. Uh, for me, that's I like knowing where we came from and why are we here and how did we get here. I like that. Uh, I guess for me, the one thing I've started to look into, I'm not a is some of the more of the esoterics. Just you know, not something I know a whole lot about, but it does have a philosophy that some deeper meaning on some things, and for me, it's something I'm kind of expanding into. But my true passion is pretty much the history part because that's something I've always liked and continue to look at.
Well, Brother Dan Kemble, I've got good news for you. We've had so far on the Square and Compass podcast, we've had two research scientists from NASA, JPL, Jason Rhodes, and Gorgian, talking about some of their satellite programs and the Euclid space mission, particularly. Euclid obviously is going to be a pretty important name, or should be an important name to Masons. So I'll leave a link for those, but anybody wants to check those out and learn more about astronomy, you can start here on this very podcast.
Excellent. Thank you.
And yeah, I feel you on the math. I can't do math to save my life. As our treasurer will tell you, I can't do math to save my life. Brother Tom,
Mhm.
I myself am a past master of two lodges. You mentioned, right, that you are currently the Worshipful master of the Research Lodge. Have you also been a Worshipful master? I forget now. I'm sorry. Worshipful master of your Blue Lodge?
Yes, Blue Lodge, Orion Lodge in Falmouth, Kentucky. It's about 50 minutes south of Cincinnati, and uh, in Ohio, or in what's in Kentucky. But uh, yeah, I've been past master of my own lodge. The current secretary, so that's the lifelong. Um, I guess I don't know. It's a lifelong thing, kind of in here. And I'm also past district deputy grand master, and Brother Dan is also a past district deputy grand master. So we've followed the craft at different levels, and so yeah, I've not only have had my own lodge, uh, now I'm part of research, but what I find is how much I've grown in Freemasonry and how I knew when I was master of my own lodge of man, I wish I could have done that or wish I could have done this. Uh, and this time around in the research lodge has allowed me to expand on some of those things that if I ever took master of my own lodge again, there would be so many more things I would like that I have ideas to do. And I think it would something I might entertain down the road.
Well, I feel your pain. I'm a past master and secretary, currently secretary as well. I've not quite made it to the right worshipful stage yet, the district deputy stage. Maybe one day, but hopefully the brethren come to their minds and don't want to put me in there. But yeah, I want to ask you, maybe to expand on that a little bit, the kind of the differences you're finding between being the worshipful master, in your mother lodge versus being the worshipful master of a research lodge. I know obviously there's less frequent meetings, only 4 times per year, but do you find, significant differences in how you approach being in the East and what it means to be a worshipful master of a research lodge versus mother lodge?
It's some things are the same, some things are not. Obviously, the opening closing ritual and getting things started in your standard business, the minutes, that's all pretty much the same. I think, I guess, because as a research lab, we don't meet that often. You're trying to put a lot of stuff into one meeting, where in your Blue Lodge, you're going to meet every month. So if you want to expand on something or do something a little differently, you have next month to do it. Within the research lodge, you only have that fifth Wednesday of the month that it happens to get everything you kind of want in. But the other thing is keeping the biggest difference is keeping the membership engaged, because with the research, like I said, we only meet 4 times a year. How do you keep brother abreast of all the things that you're doing behind the scenes? Unlike where you're in your regular lodge, Blue Lodge, where you have a pretty constant contact and you know what's going on. And I think that's the biggest difference, is making sure that we do things that continually engage uh, the membership. And that's something we did this year. And it was partly because of COVID. Is uh, now prior to the month prior to our stated meeting during the year in our research lodge, we'll do a Zoom meeting, not a meeting, but a presentation with something of Masonic relevance, and trying to just keep people engaged while you're having that long time in between.
Yeah, that's something that, I as secretary have been struggling with in Ontario, simply due to COVID. We've been over a year now without an in-person meeting. And we just went back into lockdown. So, we're not sure when we'll be able to meet in person again. So trying to, maintain engagement when you're not able to meet in person, using virtual resources and increasing correspondence and things of that nature. It seems that that's one area where research lodges will really have, another thing to teach the quote unquote regular lodges, blue lodges, is how to maintain engagement when you have, less frequent meetings, and maintain communication with the brethren. And you'll keep them engaged Masonically.
Yeah, and that's we use a lot of our website, Ware Lodge of Research.com, and that's where we provide videos, research papers, notes of Masonic interest, that we can always say, well, you don't book reviews, things that you keeping that resource out there for our membership, or even any brother, that they can go to that website, look around and go, oh, I didn't know that, or oh, I'm gonna have to get that book. And I think that still keeps them mentally engaged. And so when things do open up, or they they have that time in between, that they have some resources they know they can go to. So that's been, for us, has been pretty good deal on our end.
I will throw the link in the description to this video, but one more time, throw out that website again.
It's a William O'Ware Lodge of Research.com.
All one word.
Yep, all one word.
All right. Brother Dan Kemble, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, because this is an area in my Masonic research where I'm quite deficient. You mentioned the connection between the history of Kentucky and Freemasonry as being, indistinguishable. I believe I know a fair bit about America in general, and that, those connections. I'm sure not as much as yourself, but I know the Cliff Note, Masonic connections regarding America, but Kentucky in particular, that's not something I know very much about at all. I don't know if you can go through maybe some of the Cliff Notes, but some of those historical connections between Freemasonry and the great state of Kentucky. The Bluegrass State, is that what it is?
Bluegrass State, that's us, yes, sir.
Why is it bluegrass? Sorry, before you go into that.
Pardon me?
Why is it bluegrass? I've never actually known that.
The grass that is grown in the central region of Kentucky has a relatively bluish tint to it. It's a long bladed grass, and it's very beautiful. And when the first settlers came into Kentucky and saw those meadows, they found that bluegrass very appealing to them.
Very cool.
Our first lodge was chartered in 1788. It was chartered by the Grand Lodge of Virginia. It was Lexington Lodge 25. And then in 1800, when our Grand Lodge was chartered, Lexington Lodge 25 became Lexington Lodge number 1. We are very fortunate in Kentucky. We have in Lexington Lodge number 1 and in Ware Lodge of Research. He's a dual member of both lodges. A brother named John Bizak, who is a prolific Masonic author. I have lost count of how many books John's written. Tom, I don't know if you kept up with it or not, but I think he's hit double figures.
10 or 11.
But one of his books is called How and Why Freemasonry Came to Kentucky. And he tells a story which I think is quite fascinating, and that is in the early 1800s, Aaron Burr was involved, who was vice president of the United States at the time, was involved in a political intrigue to possibly separate the western part of the United States, that part of the United States west of the Appalachian Mountains, separate that from the United States and enter into an alliance with Spain. And so part of the establishment of Freemasonry in Kentucky came through a man named John Belly, who George Washington and Henry Knox sent to Kentucky to, among other things, report on the condition of affairs here, whether we were loyal to the United States or if we wanted to separate and go with Spain. And Freemasonry became part of the social fabric of the state and tied us to the United States. So one of the historical elements of Freemasonry coming to Kentucky is that it helped bind us to the United States at a time when it really wasn't a done deal as to whether or not the territories west of the Appalachian Mountains were going to stay in the United States, which I think is a pretty fascinating part of Kentucky history.
That is very, very, very cool. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the connections between the history of the United States, the history of Canada, for that matter, and Freemasonry, both on the provincial or state level and the country as a whole. There really are so many of them. It's such an amazingly fertile topic. Especially for brother Dan, as you mentioned, you're a history teacher in your professional career. I guess, why is it that you think, what was it about Freemasonry, if you had any guesses, that was so attractive to some of these great historical figures? George Washington, even in Canada, our first prime minister, John A. Macdonald, was a Freemason. Locally, War Chief Tecumseh, First Nations Freemason. But all of these kind of historical figures, prominent figures in our country's histories, being connected to the craft and the fraternity. Why do you think there's some of the causes for that, and what was so attractive about the craft to those men?
It all starts with the Age of Enlightenment. Freemasonry, institutional Freemasonry, is an Enlightenment era institution. We came to birth in the Age of Enlightenment in the late 17th century and the early 18th century. The Royal Academy of Sciences in London. If you look at the membership lists of early Masonic lodges, so many of those men were members of the Royal Academy as well. And I think what you found is that the principles of Freemasonry, as were articulated in that Age of Enlightenment, affirmed the values that those men already had. So there was a natural connection there. Freemasonry was very attractive. We believed in reason as opposed to superstition. We believed in men meeting as equals as opposed to having different distinctions of rank. We believed in basic equality among men. And I think all of those things are the principles and ideals that are embodied in the Age of Enlightenment. And they were the ideals when you mention a man like George Washington, an author by the name of Mark Tabbert, who is, I think, just putting the finishing touches on a tremendous biography of Washington, refers to Washington as our perfect ashlar. And he is, in fact, a perfect exemplar of the ideals of the Age of Enlightenment: justice, fortitude, patience, truth, charity. And don't those all have a familiar ring to them? Where have we heard those before? Uh, and I think at the end of the day, I think the answer to your question is the values of the leaders of that time and the values of Freemasonry are so similar that they affirmed each other, and there's a natural synergy between the two.
Is it the values of the leaders of the time, or is it the values of the time itself? My question really referencing, since say 1960, give or take, right? We've seen a decline in membership, well documented decline in the membership and the roles of lodges. When you see these periods of great Masonic growth, 1920s kind of was in a lot of ways the golden age, at least in Canada. That's when you saw Freemasonry reach kind of the highest point. Do you think that was a reflection of the values of society and Freemasonry being well aligned? Do you think that had more to do with maybe leaders in community, in the world, being aligned with Freemasonry and then bringing the two together? And I guess that leads to now, do you still believe that the values of modern society are aligned with Freemasonry, or can Freemasonry try to bring back some of those quote unquote maybe older fashioned values or ideals?
It's a great question, and I'm gonna take you back a little ways first, and obviously I cannot speak for Freemasonry in Canada, but I can tell you a little bit about what I think occurred in the United States. From about 1870 to 1920, we had what we call in the United States the golden age of fraternalism, where 1 out of every 5 men belonged to something. It was the Masons or the Odd Fellows or the Woodmen or whatever that organization was. So you had this tremendous social push towards joining something. And I think that's where, up until the end of the 1920s, where you really saw the increase in our membership was because that's what men did. They joined organizations like that. I don't think that was particularly good for Freemasonry, because what you also saw in that same time is that we shifted away from a contemplative and philosophical society into a service club orientation. And I think we lost a lot of our identity in that process. Then 1929 comes along, you have the Great Depression. We're losing members in the 1920s and 1930s. In the 1930s and the early part of the 1940s. And then in the mid 40s, we start to grow again. And we have this tremendous growth that lasts up till 1959, actually 1960 in Kentucky. In 1959, there were 4 million American Masons. In 1960, there were 100,000 Masons in Kentucky. And in the 60 years since then, it's been continuous decline. My opinion only, I think we are living in a post-Enlightenment era society. I think the values that are found in the Enlightenment era are not the values of the majority of our culture at this point. So the pool of men who would be interested in Freemasonry is smaller now than it would have been in previous times. Ironically, that's not necessarily a bad thing. When you think about it, because we are outside of the mainstream of the culture, Freemasonry is countercultural. And how ironic is that we who have been such a status quo institution are really at this point in time in our history countercultural.
You used a phrase that I want to speak to Brother Tom about, because that is something that I've been struggling with a lot. It's kind of in some ways at the heart of when I started this podcast, or why I started this podcast, the identity of Freemasonry, or the identity of the craft. One concern I have with the identity of Freemasonry is Freemasons themselves. I think we've started to identify it as a membership-based it's qualified as a membership-based club as opposed to a skilled endeavor, which is something a research lodge, I think, tends to try to deal with. So an example is, let's say I tell somebody that I'm a mixed martial artist, right? I'm or a boxer. I'm a fighter of some sort. I'm into combat sports, right? And they ask me, how often do you train? And I say, well, I don't train. And they say, well, how often do you take fights? And I say, I don't take fight. Right. The next question is going to be, well, then what makes you a fighter? And if my answer is, well, I have this card in my pocket that I'm a member of, Gold's Gym, and I may never go there and never train and never take fights, but I pay my dues and I'm a member. Hopefully the person I'm speaking to would say, well, then you may be a member of a gym, but you're not yourself a mixed martial artist. And I think the identity of a Freemason, I think we need to go back to, or we need to have more of an emphasis on the work part of it, the actual endeavors, the research, the attendance at lodge, all of those things that one has to do. But I guess my question for Brother Tom is, what would you consider to be the identity of the craft, the identity of a Freemason, and how does a research lodge help to promote that identity?
Well, I guess you'd have to say that right now, a lot of Freemasonry lodges focus on the organization. They focus on the rules, the minutes, the mundane attributes of any civic organization. And what does a Mason get out of that? Yes, I learned how to run a organization. I do get some things out of that. But I can go become an elk, a moose, or whatever type of the Lions Club, you name it. I can do that. What sets us apart is our philosophical history along with our ritual that I think we should be endeavoring to understand why we're here. How are we trying to find a way to better ourselves and get closer to our creator, whichever that may be for whoever person. And I think research lodges have the ability to, it's not so much about the day in, day out running of a lodge per se. It's about what can we do to enlighten our brethren. And I think that's what it really comes down to is research lodges are doing, doing the labor and providing that material so that our other lodges, our blue lodges, can take that and begin their own labor. And, I don't know how it is in Canada, but I, I guess I kind of put it like, it's like going to church. It, what would you get out of church? Say you went to church and you do your, the opening ceremony, your communion and all that stuff, and you had no sermon. What are you getting out of? What are you getting out of church? Nothing. So I kind of link that to our lodges in the fact that if I go to my lodge, I want to get something out of it. I want to leave there taking something that I can better myself, help another person, and internally grow. And I think that sometimes we miss that when we get focused on the organization. And you saw that like Brother Dan was saying in the 1950s, we had such a growth in Freemasonry, but we were more fixated on the members and getting more people in, and we got diluted. And I think research lodges have the ability now to bring back some of what we were and what we should be. And I think that's an opportunity for us to move other lodges ahead by providing quality education whether it be something Masonic or astronomy or math or architecture. And I think that's what we can do to better our brothers.
Cameron, if you will, that question that you posed and that analogy of the fighter with the gem card is spot on. I mean, that's one of the best analogies. In fact, if you don't mind, I may use that time in the future. But I'm going to tell you some brief statistics that I'd like for you to measure against that analogy that you made. In 2018, our Lodge of Research undertook a research project called The Characteristics of an Ideal Lodge. And we asked Kentucky Masons what they wanted to see in their lodges. And about 75% of those men indicated that they thought that our primary purpose was public charity, that we should be raising money for charity and then dispensing that money to those charities. So they view us as a charity, and I believe that that's an incorrect view. Freemasonry is not a charity. Charity is part of Freemasonry, but it isn't our reason for existence. As a part of that survey as well, we began to measure the number of men who are actually active in lodge. Now, we have roughly 30,000 Masons in Kentucky, and we determined that 56% of those men had
Sorry,
never been.
Dan? Sorry,
Yes.
we're getting a bit of squeaking on
You
your
are?
end of the.
I'll try to sit still in my chair here. I get excited when
There you go.
okay. So we found that 56% of our 30,000 Kentucky Masons had never been back in lodge since they had received their last degree. And that is exactly what you're describing. We've got a majority of our membership in this state who say that they're martial arts fighters or boxers, and they've never been back in the gym since the day they signed up.
Yeah, I remember trying to explain this, and I don't think I've ever done a very good job. I once asked the question, or I'm trying to think how to describe it. Here, a good example. I heard a actor talking about being on a movie set with a particularly, it was a challenging director who was not I mean, I'm sure he's a nice enough guy when he's not on the set, but he was mean and crass and would yell at them and all that type of stuff. And the actor didn't particularly enjoy it, but then he said something I thought was really interesting. He said he stuck it out, and you could argue, it's his job, he's getting paid. What he said, and I thought it was interesting, is, he stuck it out because he wasn't there for himself. He was there to create something that would make the world a better place. In this case, the movie, right? The movie gets put out and people are entertained by it. So he was willing to engage in something challenging and hard, not because he got because he wanted to be a part of something that would improve the world. He said, it's not about me, it's about the thing that I create for others. In Freemasonry, so often it seems like guys join, they're joining for themselves in a sense. They're joining because they want a place, not with the family or whatever it is. They're joining to get something out of it for themselves, as opposed to joining to create something that makes the world a better place. And I don't mean that in a charitable sense. They can be in the sense of like they create money, but just, I'm a firm believer that a world with well-run, well-organized, well-educated, and well-researched Masonic lodges creates a better world. But that requires, regular attendance, and that requires people to show up, and that requires people to dedicate a portion of their lives to it when they may prefer doing something else. They want to be at home, they want to be asleep. But I think so long as we can communicate to people that, your attendance, it's not about you, it's about your being here making the world a better place, because this is a place of research and enlightenment. I think that's a message that we sometimes have lost in Freemasonry. We sometimes I think we try to message it as, this is a place where you'll get something out of it. And I've certainly, many people, myself included, have got much out of Freemasonry. But instead of saying this is a place where if you join, you will make the world a better place. I think that there's a message somewhere in there that's getting lost, because people seem to have this idea of I go there for fun and enjoyment, and if I can get more fun and enjoyment going to the movies or staying at home or whatever it is, I'll do that instead.
And I think you have a really good point there. And when we talked a lot about charity, well, what about, well, it's not just the giving of money or how many, whatever you want to give away or do. And those are good things, don't get me wrong. But on the other hand, changing another person's life where they can change another person's life, how impressive, how important is that for the better? When you walk out of your lodge and you've or research lodge or wherever you came from, and you feel like that I'm going to make a change. Well, it's just like passing something along, because when you go to work or with your family, those positive interactions will rub off, and you change that person. I think that's the best charity I could think we could ever do is our work towards being a better man and giving society the I guess a way of living, a way of thinking, a way of uh, and helping them change uh, their society. And I think that in turn it will grow. And I think that's our biggest place where we don't do enough, is that charity of that human connection and that human inspiring other people to be better than they once were.
Even I agree completely. Charity, you know, charit being charitable can mean being charitable with your time and giving of your time to something else. The phrase I once used, and I said, how do we get people to be in lodge when they don't want to be in lodge? And the response was, well, we shouldn't. We should want everybody to get into lodge. But I've always thought that's not exactly a realistic way to look at it. I'm very lazy, so I don't always want to work out. In fact, I often don't want to work out. But I do it because I believe that, in doing so, and you could say it's just semantics, right? I really do, quote unquote, want to, but I certainly don't feel like doing it at the time. But I recognize that a healthier me is beneficial for me and it's beneficial for the world, right? I want to be healthy so I can, we talk about in the first degree, I want to be healthy so I can have my faculties at their fullest extent to help the world. So, just because a brother may not want to be in lodge doesn't mean that he's not needed and he shouldn't still make an effort to go. Even, for the charitable aspect, just being present at a brother's initiation or his second degree or his third degree, even if you have no work to do, even if it's just to be there on the sideline, yes, you may have seen 100 initiations before and you may see 100 in the future, but in that one moment, your presence means a lot to the brother being initiated. It's a charitable thing to do. And I think that is, yes, sometimes that is kind of a lost idea in the world of Freemasonry today.
And you can also, instead of charity, how about we just change it to love? Loving your brothers, being there for them. When you love someone, you will make the time. And sometimes, yeah, I think you're right. There's times that, man, I've been at work all day. It's been stressful. I'm brain dead. I'm just trying to find a way to relax, and I got lodge, and you know, but I still make every effort because one, I want to show that I care, uh, and I want to learn, and So even though you may be tired sometimes, making that extra effort, like you said, you feel tired, but you still go to the gym because you know it's gonna benefit you. And I think we just have to sometimes explain the hard work you do now will be so worth it in the end, and a life well lived.
Yeah, and brother Dan, I'm wondering if there's any correlations or similarities between perhaps this idea and going back to the history discussion, the Age of Enlightenment, uh, this idea of a Masonic lodge, um, not only as a place of enlightenment per se, but as a place of work and of a place where it's enjoyable and you want to be there, but there's also an expectation placed in terms of things like work and attendance, and just as a place of where there's something more than quote unquote socializing, but an actual attempt to make the world a better place.
We'll go back to your gym analogy. When you have been in the gym and you've worked out, how do you feel besides tired? How do you feel after that workout? You feel refreshed in some sense, and you feel like you've accomplished something, and you feel like you're walking out a better man than you were when you walked in. I would hope that the experience in any Masonic lodge, whether it be a working Blue Lodge or a Lodge of Research, is that when you walk out at the end of the day, you feel refreshed. You feel refreshed spiritually. You feel refreshed mentally. You feel refreshed socially as well, because all of that means that you have worked that particular evening. You may have worked at ritual. You may have worked at just being there to be a compassionate ear for someone. One of the things that I think that we deal with, and I think something that got overlooked to a certain extent, is when Freemasonry grew so large. We had lodges of 100 men and 200 men and 300 men. And you can't intimately know your brothers in a lodge of 300 or even 200, and it's hard to do in 100. Smaller lodges give you the environment where you can know on a one-to-one basis your brothers in a particular lodge. And as you get to know them on a one-to-one basis, you become invested in their successes the same way you're invested in your successes as well. And that's part of the work also of being a Mason. And I think those are the things in our rush to big numbers, we lost that intimacy that we can have in smaller numbers.
The challenge that we're seeing right now in not just Ontario, but many jurisdictions, and I'm wondering if this is true of Kentucky or just what your thoughts are on this challenge is, we have a Masonic infrastructure built really for the 1920s, and the assumption that pattern would continue in terms of the size of our buildings and the size of the buildings, the meeting rooms, the number of committees, the infrastructure, and there's discussion in New York, there's discussion all in Alaska. I talked to brethren about this, about this idea of trying to maintain buildings and infrastructures that were built at a time when you had such a bigger base by which to collect dues and collect revenue, or, retreat's not the right word because it's got a connotation I don't like, but a strategic withdrawal. Do we try to return more to smaller venues, kind of the roots of the craft above taverns, things of that nature? I guess I'm curious as to, if Kentucky is experiencing anything similar, or just your thoughts, both in terms of your research and your Blue Lodges. Any?
Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, and we are, Tom and I are members of lodges that are about 40 miles apart. So we're really part of the same community. But we have a Scottish Rite Temple in Covington, Kentucky, which is where our research lodge meets. And there are two Blue Lodges that meet in that building. So they're tenants there. My Blue Lodge meets in a different building in a different part of the community, and we're tenants in that building. We don't own the building in which we meet now. So what you're seeing, all of that is true because those lodges at one time all had their own buildings, but because of dwindling membership and high insurance and high real estate taxes and high maintenance costs, they haven't been able to sustain their physical facilities. And I think that's absolutely what we're seeing now, is that those beautiful buildings that we built from about 1890 up through 1929 have become liabilities to us. And if you travel the breadth of the state of Kentucky, and I suspect most of the United States, you'll find Masonic lodges that are in a pretty serious state of decay because we just don't have the numbers to sustain that anymore. Quite frankly, I wish we'd get back to the days where we didn't have buildings to upkeep and we weren't as concerned about material possessions. I'd love to go back to inns and taverns and local restaurants and not focus on the mechanical things, but begin to focus on the philosophical and spiritual things, which is really what we came here to do.
And I'd just like to add, and the always thing I always look at is, what is the lodge? Is it the building or is it your brothers? And if it comes down to that physical building is your lodge, we weren't never meant to be that. It's just an empty building without your brothers. So, like Brother Dan said, does it really? Yes, we do have some, uh, uh, how to put this? We do have some affection for our places where we go. I get that, but in the end, does that really matter when it's all about our brothers, and where you meet is just a side part of it.
It's always fun to have disagreements on a podcast. So I will say, if you've seen any of my past episodes, I've always been of the other view in terms of maintaining the buildings. But I definitely, there's a very strong argument as to what you're saying, and I do recognize that. I guess that though, my trying to the I've always wondered, is there a viable middle ground, quote unquote, in terms of these Masonic structures and this is something I've emphasized because the Windsor Masonic Temple is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year,
Mm-hmm.
As being both a Masonic home, but also a community home. The best example of that would probably be Detroit, right across the river, which so many people will talk, and even in Windsor, because you cross the river, you're right in Detroit. Will say they went to a concert at the Masonic, and they won't recognize, even as they say it, that it has a fraternal connection. To them, it's a concert hall. It's a place they go to see the Stones, Phantom of the Opera, the Monkees, all these amazing bands over the years. I guess I've always wondered, is there a way for some of these grand Masonic temples to the way to maintain themselves is to become open to the public, in the sense of this can be a home for yourself as well, whether it be concerts, weddings, tours like Philadelphia, different ways to include the public, and in some ways, include them in the Masonic journey. Because I do like to think that, a history of positive events in a location can, make the building a better place for everybody. Or is that, again, does that just that's something, I mean, we've seen with COVID, right? How many Masonic temples, and I know of a few, who relied on outside revenue to maintain themselves in the face of dwindling dues, and then that was taken away from them. And if they had no reserves, they're now in a lot of trouble at this point. So I guess my question is, do you think there's a role for the general public, quote unquote, in Freemasonry to be involved in certain aspects of the buildings, the craft? Or again, is it better to go back to those more esoteric, quote unquote, insular roots?
I certainly have no objection to having the public involved. In our Scottish Rite Temple here in Covington, we've got a 500-seat theater, and on occasion, the city of Covington has used that for different purposes. I'd like to see that happen more often. I'd love to see us integrated into the community in that fashion. One of our issues as Freemasons is people aren't aware of us. They don't know that we exist. I have talked with people who have come into that temple for a different purpose, and said, "Oh, I've lived here, all my life. I'm 45, I'm 50, I'm 60 years old, and I've never been in this building. I didn't know what you did here." And they see that it's a very useful, very beautiful facility. So I'm all for that. I'm completely happy with letting the public see who we are, and letting them know that we're still here. But I told you earlier I'm not very good at math, but I think math is against us in this particular area, and that is the cost of maintenance versus the revenue coming in is just awfully difficult to reconcile.
So looking ahead, like I said, I'll throw the website down in the description, but if any brethren are interested in learning in growing in the craft, in getting more research, getting any research to share perhaps with their brethren, to make presentations in lodge, how would they go about that? Worshipful brother, I'll let you take it.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
No worries. Just if any brethren want to gather some research documents or documentation to share with their lodge to make educational presentations, perhaps they want to get in touch with either their local research lodge or yourselves. How would they get in touch with yourself, and how would they connect with you and learn about some of the research you've got going on?
Well, generally the best way to get a hold of us is through our website. That you can connect through there. We also have our Facebook site as well, Ware Lodge of Research. So they can go to those two places to try to get a hold of us and contact us. And there's plenty of ways. Just quick Google search. And honestly, that's kind of what we kind of talked about. I was like, how did you locate us? And you said, well, I just did a quick Google search. And I thought that, in this time that, here you are in Canada and you find a research lodge in Kentucky, and we see the great expanse of our two countries. And by a simple Google search, I'm getting talked to a brother from Canada, and I think that's great. And we've shared so many great topics and debates, and it's kind of thing when you talked about, should we save the buildings, it's that, and we obviously have different views, but we are talking in a respectful manner and learning from each other's ideas of why we are, and that's Masonry. And so what you're doing is a great thing. And but getting back to the point where for contact, you either go through our website or through our Facebook page to get a hold of us.
And Brother Tom, what would you say? You kind of talked about this way back at the start. You mentioned how you were nervous and hesitant about public speaking, especially early in your Masonic career, to any brethren who maybe they're new in their Masonic career, or maybe they've been a Mason for a while, but just have always been nervous about, making an educational presentation in lodge, or speaking in lodge, I guess, what would you say to them? What advice would you have for them?
I would say just do it. It took some nudging from me from the guy that's on cast here tonight with me, a little bit of nudging, a little brotherly help along the way. And that was a lot of mentorship. And I would say, don't discount your abilities. And it's okay to fail. And I say that not in the sense that you want to do a terrible job or anything like that, but you may not be the best at certain things. But if you can be better than you were yesterday, you have improved. And I would tell that to anybody. It took me baby steps, being in lodge, starting researching little topics of Masonic interest. And I took little by little in my own Blue Lodge to look up things and then get over that, try to get past that fear of talking, trying to find the words, and don't compare yourself to other people. You're you are unique. And your best and my best may be two different things. So trying to compare yourself to other people, you're a unique person. And I think if you go into that understanding that as long as you're improving and you're at least doing the work, you've won half the battle. And I think that's what I would tell someone.
Now, the most important question, since I am here in Windsor, Ontario, when you guys are at your meetings, or perhaps when you find yourself with other Masonic brethren after a meeting at a local watering hole, is it, do you prefer Kentucky bourbon or Canadian whiskey?
Brother Dan, would you like to?
I've never heard of Canadian whiskey. No, I'm teasing you. Kentucky bourbon's a religion down here, my friend. Come down here and we'll give you plenty of it.
If I ever make my way to, I've been to Kentucky once. I got to be in Louisville, which was, I had a lot of fun there. But perhaps I will bring some Hiram Walker whiskey, and we'll see which is preferred.
We would be happy to do research on that project.
Yes,
that's an
important one. Send us
a
bottle.
Maybe I'll see if I can send one down your way. But in exchange, I would perhaps have to ask for some reciprocity. Perhaps some Kentucky bourbon could find its way to my my lodge brethren.
Of course.
Brethren, it has been this would be my first interview with brethren from Kentucky. I've had the chance, like I said, to visit the temple in Louisville. I got to be there for their fish fry, actually, but I've never had a chance to speak to anybody on the podcast. So it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you both so much for taking the time down there in Louisville to speak to me up here in Canada.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about Ware Lodge of Research and Freemasonry in general. And it's amazing, like I said before, to see all the commonalities that we all have as brothers, and to come into a show like this and talk Masonry. And we all have that shared common bond that we're all brothers. It's awesome. And I thank you for what you do.
And with that, brethren, I will remind everybody watching, because I always forget to hit the like button, subscribe button, comment, all that good stuff. Any topics you want to see me discuss on the podcast, or any guests that you want me to reach out to or have that you think could help either in your Masonic journey or even if you're not a Mason but want to learn more about the craft, leave a comment down below.